The photograph that would alter everything was taken at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night in Venice. Yet, Lauren Sanchez would not learn of its existence until 3 months later, when it appeared in a plain manila envelope with no return address. Inside was a single handwritten note. "You were never supposed to see this." What she found in that image shook not only her trust in her marriage, but her entire sense of the world she believed she had stepped into. The picture captured her wedding reception from an unfamiliar angle, taken from above through what looked like a hidden camera tucked inside the crystal chandelier. But it wasn't the unusual perspective that made her stop cold. It was what appeared in the background. Her new husband, standing in a corner invisible from her seat at the head table, locked in a serious conversation with an unknown man. Both of them were staring directly at her while she smiled and greeted guests, unaware she was being observed. The man's face was partly hidden, but his body language was unmistakable. He held a tablet, and even with the grainy quality of the surveillance shot, she could make out what seemed to be financial records on the screen. Her husband's expression was not that of someone celebrating his wedding. It was detached, focused, and businesslike. The look of a man engaged in a transaction while the rest of the room believed they were witnessing a celebration of love. But this discovery would not come until months later. On that enchanting night in Venice, Lauren believed she was living the fairy tale that had captured the attention of the world. The truth, however, was far darker, and it had been set in motion long before she ever said, "I do." 6 months earlier, in the glass towers of Manhattan, where influential figures shape global affairs from climate-controlled boardrooms, a very different kind of ceremony was already underway. This gathering had no flowers, no music, no champagne toasts. Instead, it featured leather portfolios, digital tablets, and conversations conducted in the clinical language of corporate warfare. The attendees were not wedding planners or event coordinators. They were forensic accountants, private investigators, media strategists, and attorneys who specialized in what they euphemistically called reputation management. The conference room overlooked Central Park, but none of them glanced at the view. Their attention was focused on a single manila folder placed at the center of the mahogany table, labeled with just 2 words, Project Venice. Inside that folder was a 247-page document that would make most people's blood run cold. It was not a wedding plan. It was a blueprint for the most sophisticated character assassination ever conceived. Every detail of what the world would see as a romantic celebration had been reverse-engineered to serve a darker purpose. The guest list was not chosen for friendship or family connections. Each name represented a strategic asset or potential witness. The venue was not selected for its beauty, but for its surveillance capabilities. Even the menu had been designed with ulterior motives. Certain dishes would ensure guests remained alert and talkative, their conversations more easily recorded by the hidden microphones woven throughout the palazzo. The man orchestrating this elaborate deception sat at the head of the table, his expression as emotionless as a chess grandmaster contemplating his next move. To the world, he was preparing to marry the woman he loved. In reality, he was constructing the most elaborate trap in the history of modern relationships, designed not to catch a criminal, but to create one. Phase 1 is the documentation, he explained to his assembled team, his voice carrying the detached precision of someone discussing quart. This meeting offered no flowers, no music, and no celebratory toasts. Instead, it was filled with leather binders, digital tablets, and conversations framed in the calculated language of corporate conflict. The participants were not event planners or coordinators. They were forensic accountants, investigators, media consultants, and attorneys specializing in what they politely referred to as reputation management. The conference room looked out over Central Park, yet no one paid attention to the scenery. Their focus was fixed on a single manila folder resting at the center of the polished mahogany table. Its cover bore only 2 words, Project Venice. Inside lay a 247-page report capable of unsettling even the most hardened reader. This was not a wedding outline. It was a strategic plan for one of the most advanced campaigns of personal destruction ever designed. Every element of what the public would interpret as a romantic occasion had been carefully re-engineered, to serve an entirely different purpose. The guest list had not been assembled based on family ties or friendships. Each individual invited served as either a calculated resource or a potential witness. The choice of venue had little to do with charm and everything to do with its ability to support surveillance. Even the food was selected with intent. Specific dishes were meant to keep guests alert and talkative, ensuring their conversations could be more easily captured by the microphones discreetly placed throughout the estate. At the head of the table sat the man directing the scheme, his face calm, almost analytical, like a grandmaster weighing a critical move on the chessboard. Outwardly, he appeared to be preparing for a marriage to the woman he loved. In truth, he was engineering an elaborate setup, one not aimed at uncovering wrongdoing, but at manufacturing it. Phase 1 is the documentation, he told his team, his voice steady, precise. More like a financial briefing than a discussion of his upcoming wedding, more like an earnings report than a conversation about his forthcoming nuptials. Every interaction, every remark, every small movement had to be recorded and filed. She was to believe she was planning a new life, while, in reality, she was assembling evidence for her own prosecution. The attorneys took notes on tablets that would never be introduced in court. The private investigators adjusted earpieces, already working out where to hide surveillance gear that only their technicians would find. The media strategists started drafting releases that would read as romantic while also producing a paper trail. Phase 2 starts right after the ceremony, he said, displaying architectural plans of the Venetian palazzo on the screen. She'll assume the 30-day observation period is a honeymoon. We will run the most exhaustive background inquiry ever done on a private citizen. An attorney raised a hand. The prenuptial? He asked. A thin smile appeared. That agreement doesn't merely protect my assets. It establishes the legal scaffolding for her undoing. Every clause is drafted not to stop her from taking my money, but to ensure she has no remedy when we move against her. Silence fell as the consequences became clear. This was not a wedding plan. It was a siege, and the target had no idea she was under attack. Lauren's first uneasy sign arrived during what should have been the happiest weeks of her life. The period after their engagement swept her onto magazine covers, into designer fittings, and into private events, where she mingled with celebrities and politicians she had only seen on TV. She felt suddenly transformed from an ordinary life to one of private jets and unlimited possibilities. But small oddities began to pile up around Lauren's new existence. A personal shopper insisted on joining every appointment, saying it was for security. A social media manager appeared out of nowhere, explaining that someone of her profile needed professional handling of their online presence. A nutritionist, a trainer, an image consultant, all presented as gifts from her fiancé and all adamant that their help was necessary. What Lauren didn't know was that each gift carried invisible strings. The personal shopper logged every purchase, preference, and casual remark about money or lifestyle. The social media manager had full access to her accounts, tracking not only posts but followers and photo metadata. The nutritionist monitored her eating habits and emotional reactions, compiling a psychological profile that could later be used against her. The fitness trainer turned out to be one of the most deceptive additions to her inner circle. During their sessions, he encouraged her to share details about her past relationships, her family, her ambitions, and her fears. She believed she was forming a bond with someone who understood the pressures of her new lifestyle. In truth, she was providing material for a carefully planned effort to undermine her character. "Tell me about your ex-boyfriend," the trainer would casually ask while she pushed through a challenging workout. "It must be hard to trust again after being let down." Tired and vulnerable, Lauren opened up about her past disappointments, insecurities, and doubts about whether she truly deserved her success. Unbeknownst to her, every word was being recorded by a device concealed inside the trainer's water bottle. These confessions were later cataloged and examined by specialists mapping out her psychological vulnerabilities in detail. The engagement party, hosted at a private Hamptons estate, should have been a joyful occasion. Instead, it acted as a trial run for the surveillance system that would later be used at the wedding. Guests wandered across manicured lawns, unaware that hidden cameras were capturing conversations from multiple angles. Lauren, radiant and gracious, moved through the crowd accepting congratulations, never realizing that every interaction was being documented and reviewed. Even the guest list was curated with precision. Old friends from Lauren's past were invited not out of affection, but to encourage her to drop her guard and speak more openly. Business contacts were included to observe her behavior in professional settings. Media figures were deliberately placed to prompt remarks that could later be reframed or misinterpreted. "She seems different," one of Lauren's college friends remarked quietly to another guest, not realizing their words were picked up by a microphone hidden in a flower arrangement. "More guarded, like she's always performing." That single observation was later recorded in a confidential file titled "Subject's Behavioral Patterns During Social Integration Phase." The analysts observed that Lauren was becoming more aware of herself as she adjusted to her new surroundings. Yet they treated this natural response as proof of dishonesty. Ordinary human reactions were being framed as suspicious, shaping a narrative against her that grew more convincing each day. The prenuptial agreement was presented to her just 3 days before the wedding, at a moment when she was preoccupied with final arrangements and emotionally vulnerable. The timing was deliberate. The lawyers expected she would be too distracted to review the document thoroughly and too focused on the ceremony to challenge its terms. What she was not told was that this contract differed greatly from a standard prenuptial agreement. Buried within its 87 pages of dense legal wording were provisions granting her future husband extensive authority over her life, both during and after marriage. These included silence clauses that restricted her from speaking publicly about their relationship, image clauses giving him control over how she appeared in the media, and financial clauses that would leave her without resources if she opposed him. Most troubling were behavior clauses, written in vague terms, so that nearly any action could be deemed a violation: conversing with certain people, visiting specific places, or voicing particular opinions. Any of these could activate penalties, ranging from financial ruin to complete social exclusion, enforced through his influential network. Lauren signed the document in her bridal suite, surrounded by flowers and champagne, convinced she was securing her future happiness. In truth, she was entering an agreement designed to strip her of autonomy, crafted by legal experts skilled in disguising coercion as inevitability. The choice of Venice as the wedding location was not based on romance, but on security advantages. The historic palazzo hosting the ceremony had been quietly purchased 6 months earlier through a shell company, allowing technicians to install a sophisticated surveillance system throughout the property. Every room contained hidden cameras within light fixtures, artwork, and decorations unlikely to draw suspicion. The audio system was even more advanced, using directional microphones to isolate private conversations in crowded spaces. The palazzo's centuries-old design, with thick walls and multiple floors, concealed the miles of fiber optic wiring connecting all devices to a central monitoring hub located in the renovated wine cellar. The guest list of 300 was not limited to friends and family. Attendees unknowingly became part of a psychological study. Hollywood celebrities provided glamour and ensured media outlets focused on style rather than subtle surveillance cues. Politicians and corporate leaders served to validate the event, their presence reinforcing the narrative that would later be promoted. Meanwhile, family and close friends were strategically positioned to provoke genuine emotional responses from Lauren, all of which could be observed and analyzed. The ceremony unfolded with near-military precision. Lauren's placement at the altar was carefully arranged so she could be seen by the greatest number of recording devices. The officiant, chosen not for reputation or presence, but because his voice patterns would not disrupt the audio systems, ensured that background conversations could be captured without interference. Even the music was not selected for sentiment, but for its acoustic qualities, frequencies capable of concealing the faint hum of hidden recording equipment. As Lauren walked down the aisle in her tailored gown, believing she was living the dream of a perfect wedding, she was instead taking part in one of the most extensively documented ceremonies ever staged. Every gesture, smile, and tear was being recorded from multiple angles and uploaded to servers, not to preserve a celebration of love, but as evidence in a case already predetermined. The reception revealed the true purpose of the evening, though only to those who recognized the signs. Lauren's closest relatives and friends were seated at tables outfitted with highly sensitive recording devices. Their conversations about her past, her character, and her relationships were gathered in flawless detail. Business contacts were positioned where their remarks about her career ambitions and professional abilities could be monitored, later used to challenge her credibility. Every customary moment, the dancing, the speeches, the cutting of the cake, was carried out under a layer of surveillance that could rival intelligence operations. Lauren moved through the night radiating joy, receiving congratulations and posing for photographs, never aware she was providing material that would contribute to her downfall. The image that eventually exposed the truth, the one capturing her husband in a secretive business discussion during their reception, came from one of the many cameras she never knew existed. Yet that single photograph was not intended to remain. Someone, whether a technician acting on conscience or a guard who saw what he should not, managed to preserve it and remove it from the venue. That picture would later serve as Lauren's undeniable proof that her marriage was founded on deceit, but it reached her only after the trap had already closed. The attack unfolded exactly as orchestrated, swift and ruthless. It began before she could even process what she had uncovered. By the time she realized she was under attack, the machinery of her destruction was already operating across several states and multiple countries. The first strike came through legal means. Lawsuits surfaced at the same time in New York, California, and London, each one accusing her of different kinds of misconduct. But each suit was crafted to freeze her assets and push her toward bankruptcy while she fought to defend herself. The prenuptial agreement she had signed included provisions that made her responsible for legal costs on both sides, guaranteeing that every extra day of litigation increased her debt. The second phase was social. Within hours of the filings, her husband's media team began seeding tailored stories to tabloids and gossip outlets. Surveillance clips from their marriage were edited and shown out of context to portray her as manipulative. Private conversations with friends were leaked to suggest she was ungrateful and scheming. Even her charitable work was rewritten as evidence of a hunger for publicity and social advancement. The third phase targeted her career. Business contacts went silent. Projects she had been developing were canceled without explanation. Agents who had once pursued her stopped returning calls. Her husband's team, now controlling her social channels, unleashed coordinated online attacks. Comments that looked organic but were actually driven by advanced bot networks engineered to ruin her reputation. Within 48 hours, Lauren was isolated. Those who had celebrated her wedding pulled back, some convinced by the new narrative, others afraid to be linked to someone who had fallen in their social circles. Family members began receiving anonymous packets containing selective evidence, eroding trust even. Among her closest relatives, the most devastating discovery was that her attorney calls were being monitored and used against her. Strategies she tried to form were anticipated and neutralized before she could act. Potential allies were contacted and warned off. She was fighting a campaign in which her opponents could see every move while she remained deprived of reliable information. The final, chilling lesson was that her discovery of the surveillance had been engineered. The anonymous envelopes, the photographs, the proof of her husband's duplicity, all of it had been staged. They wanted her to find out because the psychological blow of being manipulated was part of the punishment. The note accompanying the last envelope spelled it out plainly. You were never supposed to win. You were meant to be an example. Lauren understood then that her marriage had not only been constructed to destroy her, but to send a warning to anyone who might challenge the existing balance of power. She had been chosen, manipulated, and destroyed to demonstrate what happens to those who challenge the system. Sitting alone in her frozen assets penthouse with her reputation ruined, Lauren finally realized she had never been fighting for a marriage or a future. She had been placed into the role of villain to protect a world where absolute power carried no accountability. The photograph that had set her on the path to the truth now felt like a minor piece of evidence in a conspiracy that extended well beyond her personal ruin. She had been sacrificed to maintain a system, and the two words her husband murmured in Venice were not a late confession of love lost, but a confirmation that her fate had been decided long before she thought she had fallen in love. In the quiet of the empty penthouse, Lauren understood she had never truly been a bride. She had been treated as evidence in a case against herself, and the verdict had been decided before the trial ever began.